In a New Mexico landfill, workers once buried truckloads of unsold video games under concrete. The most infamous boxes carried one title, Atari's E.T. the Extraterrestrial, a game based on one of the biggest movies ever made. For decades, that desert grave became the symbol of the video game crash of 1983. But did one terrible game really destroy an industry, or did it simply expose a business already collapsing? Before the crash, Atari was not just a game company, it was the company that convinced North America a video game machine belonged under the television. The Atari 2600 launched in the late 1970s, and its promise was simple. The arcade could come home. Families who once needed quarters and a trip to the mall could now play Space Invaders, Asteroids, and Missile Command in the living room. The graphics were simple, the sounds were harsh, but the idea felt futuristic. Retailers saw the numbers and treated video games like the next toy revolution. Cartridges were small, expensive, and profitable. A hit game could sell millions. Atari became the name parents recognized, the brand stores trusted, and the target every competitor wanted to copy. For a brief moment, the business looked almost impossible to ruin. More consoles appeared, more publishers entered the market. Companies with no real experience in game design saw cartridges as a fast way to print money. If a box had colorful art and fit into an Atari system, stores would often stock it. That success changed Atari's behavior. Instead of treating each game like a product that had to earn trust, the company began treating the market like it would buy anything. Competitors learned the same lesson. The gold rush was no longer about making great games. It was about getting as many games as possible onto shelves before the boom ended. Atari had created a market, but it had not created strong rules for who could enter it. Unlike Nintendo years later, Atari did not tightly control every game released for its console. Outside companies learned how to make cartridges for the Atari 2600, and once that door opened, the shelves filled fast. Some publishers were serious developers, others were toy companies, food companies, and opportunists chasing a trend they barely understood. The result was a flood of games that looked exciting on the box and felt unfinished at home. Stores carried rushed arcade clones, strange licensed cash-ins, and cheap titles built around whatever name might catch a parent's eye. Even adult-themed games appeared for the same family console that had sold Pac-Man to children. Customers could no longer tell which cartridges were worth the money. A few bad purchases made families cautious. Retailers felt the damage even faster. Unsold games took up shelf space, returns increased, and discount bins filled with cartridges that had once been ordered like guaranteed hits. Publishers kept producing as if demand was endless, but the numbers were breaking underneath them. Warehouses held too much inventory. Stores had too many choices and too little confidence. Tea arrived. The industry was already overloaded with products people did not trust. The famous disaster did not start the fire. It gave the fire a face. Tea like the safest bet in video games. The movie was a global phenomenon, and the company paid an enormous sum for the rights, reportedly more than $20 million. Tea. The schedule was brutal from the start. Atari gave the job to Howard Scott Warshaw, one of its top programmers, because he had already made successful games like Yar's Revenge and Raiders of the Lost Ark. He was talented, trusted, and fast, but Atari did not give him a normal development cycle. To hit the holiday deadline, Warshaw had roughly 5 weeks to design, code, test, and finish a major licensed game. The result was a cartridge that many players could not understand. T had to collect phone pieces, avoid government agents, and somehow call home, but the objectives were unclear without reading the manual closely. The screen layouts felt repetitive, and the famous pits became the game's biggest frustration. Players would fall in, climb out, take a few steps, and fall right back in. Again. The controls made that frustration worse. T moved awkwardly, actions were hard to time, and the game often felt like it was fighting the player. For kids expecting the magic of the movie, it felt unfinished. For parents who had paid full price, it felt like a mistake. Atari had manufactured millions of cartridges, expecting a blockbuster. Instead, stores were hit with returns, unsold copies, and angry customers. The company had bought one of the most valuable names in entertainment, then rushed it so badly that the name became a warning label. T was no longer just a bad game. It had become the easiest symbol for a market that was already breaking. Atari was not the only company flooding shelves. The success of the Atari 2600 had convinced publishers, toy companies, and even brands with no real game experience that cartridges were easy money. Stores filled with rushed releases, copycat ideas, and games built around licensed licenses, rather than quality. Customers had too many choices, and too few reasons to trust any of them. Retailers felt the damage first. Games that once sold at premium prices started piling up in bargain bins. Cartridges that had cost around $30 or $40 were marked down to $5 or $10 just to clear space. Some stores returned unsold stock to publishers. Others reduced their video game sections or abandoned them completely, treating cartridges like a failed fad instead of the future of entertainment. The numbers were brutal. In North America, video game revenue had reached billions of dollars in 1982. By 1985, it had collapsed to only a fraction of that. The crash did not happen because one game disappointed people. It happened because millions of buyers decided the whole category was risky. Atari took the hardest hit. In 1983, the company suffered massive losses, and its parent company, Warner Communications, saw Atari go from profit engine to financial disaster. Layoffs followed. Warehouses filled with unwanted cartridges. The brand that had practically defined home video games became a warning about what happens when hype, overproduction, and weak quality control all hit at once. T did not destroy the industry by itself. It exposed how fragile the industry had become. Then came the story that sounded too perfect to be true. In September 1983, trucks connected to Atari arrived at a landfill in Alamogordo, New Mexico. They dumped unsold inventory into the ground, including cartridges, consoles, controllers, and other hardware. The load was crushed, covered with concrete, and buried. T disaster into a legend. T in the desert, as if the company had tried to hide its shame under the dirt. Others dismissed it as an exaggeration, a gamer myth built from bad memories and worse headlines. Then, in 2014, a crew making the documentary Atari Game Over received permission to excavate the site. They dug into the old landfill in front of cameras, reporters, and former Atari employees. What came out was not a rumor. The excavation recovered about 1,300 cartridges and items, but also other Atari games and hardware. That detail matters, because the legend was never completely accurate. Grave. T was there, and that was enough. The myth had been exaggerated, but the core was real. Atari really did bury unsold stock in the New Mexico desert, and the worst game in the industry's most famous crash became an artifact people could hold in their hands. Out of that wreckage, Nintendo entered North America with a problem bigger than selling a console. Retailers no longer trusted video games, so Nintendo avoided calling the Nintendo Entertainment System a video game machine at first. It was packaged with a toy robot, a light gun, and language that made it feel like new home entertainment, not another Atari-style gamble. But the real change was control. Nintendo required publishers to be licensed before making games for the system. Cartridges used a lockout chip, so unapproved software could not easily run on the hardware. Third-party companies were limited in how many games they could release each year, which made it harder to flood shelves with rushed products. Then came the Nintendo seal of quality. It did not mean every game was great, but it told stores and parents that someone was checking what reached the market. Atari had chased volume. Nintendo rebuilt the business around trust. The crash had taught the industry that hype could sell a cartridge once, but trust was what brought people back. E.T. did not destroy video games alone. It became the clearest symbol of an industry that chose speed, hype, and short-term profit over players. One greedy decision did not kill gaming by itself, but it helped bury an empire that had already stopped earning trust. Thanks for watching. If modern rushed releases remind you of this story, write a comment below and subscribe for more gaming history.